David Glenn of The David Glenn Show, largest North Carolina sports talk show, and, of course, all over the ACC, college sports, and more on your radio. David, thank you so much for taking some time, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jake. Good to be with you again.
Hey, appreciate you joining us. All right, I'm going to work my way inside the ACC and then back out. And I do want to hit a basketball or 2 question before we get out here on the ACC. Florida State, Matt Baker reported earlier today, Florida State Board of Trustees meeting to discuss a potential internal bank loan to athletics for, quote, potential non-capital strategic initiatives. It seems like every time you wake up, there's something different with Florida State wanting out of the league, NCAA probation, bank loans. This ACC-Florida State marriage, I just don't know. Is there any way that this is going to work?
Well, they're going to get a divorce. It's just a matter of time and for how much money. And the bottom line is that this is a precarious position for the ACC, which is 71 years old, and it has survived the departure of other members. But in this particular case, Florida State is the biggest and best football brand that the ACC has. I mean, and part of that is just more people watch Seminoles games than watch, on average, the games of any other ACC member. And we all know that football is the tail wagging the dog these days, and football TV money is what keeps these athletic departments wealthy. Men's basketball a long time ago was 50% of the money. By some estimates, now men's basketball is only 19 or 20% of the money, and football is in that 80% neighborhood. So the bottom line is Florida State would love to leave for zero money, no exit fee, no grant of rights media loss. And as Florida State's own attorneys have outlined, the maximum that they would have to lose or pay is $572 million. So I don't think either of those extremes is going to be the final product as this plays out over a period of multiple years in the courts. But obviously, if FSU leaves for $100 million, that would invite others to try to leave. But if FSU was forced to pay or lose $400 million, I think others would hesitate to leave for that severe of a fee. So it's in front of the judges. There's dueling lawsuits. There's 2 different states involved in those lawsuits. There's jurisdiction battles and a whole bunch of other things that I will not bore your listeners with, even though I've practiced it. I've been an attorney here in North Carolina since 1994. That has helped me more in my sports media career than I ever thought it would, and that's the case with this Florida State ACC dueling lawsuit situation.
David Glenn on your radio. Make sure to follow him on X at David Glenn Show. That's David Glenn Show. Check him out online at davidglennshow.com. Yeah, David, this is interesting to me because when you look at the league, and I want to get your thought on the football league. I mean, Florida State, obviously, we know about the undefeated season, getting snubbed, if you look at it on that side or not, by the by the College Football Playoff Committee. But you look at the year Florida State had. You look at Louisville in the year that they had, a 10-win team. NC State, again, quietly with a 9-win team. Clemson, 9 wins. Where is that program under Dabo Swinney? Is it kind of an idol? You look at Duke, Manny Diaz comes into the program, North Carolina. I mean, it's a very competitive league. So, and I know it's all about money for Florida State, but you got SMU now that will play football there. Stanford will play football there. Competitive wise, I mean, it's outside of the SEC and the Big Ten. I mean, it's right there at number 3.
Yeah, it is a solid league. And, people forget that Florida State finished in the top 10 and Clemson, NC State, and Louisville all finished in the top 25. And as you mentioned, it was the rare down year for the Clemson Tigers. I personally think they're going to bounce back, and they've certainly been one of the most successful college football teams in the country for the last decade or so, including 2 national championships under Dabo Swinney. Then at one point, 7 or 8 straight ACC football championships for the Clemson Tigers. So there's certainly quality at the top. There's some depth, but really the bottom line, Jake, goes back to the money that you mentioned. And one big difference here in ACC country is that not as many people on average watch ACC football compared to the number of people who watch Big Ten football or SEC football. Now, you're right in the middle of SEC country. You could probably teach a class on SEC football. They not only win the most national championships and other accolades, but they also have intensely passionate fan bases that watch in huge numbers, sometimes even when their favorite team is not all that great. And in the Atlantic Coast Conference, yes, Florida State fans tend to watch in huge numbers. Clemson fans tend to watch in huge numbers. But putting aside the wins and losses, most of the other fan bases in the ACC do not watch football in as huge numbers as you see for a larger number of Big Ten programs and a larger number of SEC programs. So what happens is when these commissioners sit down with their TV partners, believe it or not, wins and losses are a smaller part of the conversation. The bigger part of the conversation is, what has the last year shown? What have the last 5 years shown? What have the last 10 years shown when it comes to how many SEC fans are watching football and how many ACC fans are watching football? Not just for the best teams, but these TV partners are paying for the whole package, so they want to know from A to Z who's watching a lot of football. And back in the day, even 20 years ago, Jake, men's basketball money was roughly the equivalent for some leagues as the football TV money. Well, those days are over, and the ACC is more famous for men's basketball. It is less famous for football. A lot of these schools' fan bases are more into basketball than they are into football. And remember, unlike the SEC and the Big Ten, the ACC has a bunch of smaller private universities whose alumni bases are simply not as large. And that's another thing that depresses the TV eyeballs. The funniest, weirdest, most ridiculous aspect of the Florida State lawsuit is that they're accusing the ACC commissioners of not negotiating TV deals that are as good as the TV deals of the SEC and the Big Ten, and they're leaving out the most obvious fact, and they're leaving it out on purpose because they know it makes their argument look bad. The SEC and the Big Ten commissioners are essentially negotiating with aces and kings and queens in their hands. Why? Because not only do their teams win a lot in football, their fans watch way more football than ACC fans do, on average, over a many-year period. That's John Swofford, former ACC commissioner, and the current ACC commissioner. Yeah, they have that third or fourth best in some years football product, but they also have the third or fourth best TV eyeball number. And when you're negotiating from that position, obviously you have much less leverage to demand bigger dollars, whether your partner is ESPN, CBS, or anybody else.
David Glenn talking ACC sports and, of course, NCAA sports. David Glenn Show in the great state of North Carolina, Wednesday edition of the program. David, that takes me to Capitol Hill tomorrow, where Charlie Baker and Power 5 commissioners will meet in D.C. and discuss this Project D1, this subcommittee or this subconference that Baker wants people to jump into. But then you look at the SEC particularly and the Big Ten. They said no. A lot of people saying, hey, we're running out of time. This could be where the split happens. What do you think ultimately happens? And I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball here, but logistically, I mean, this is fascinating that we're kind of, everybody says, what's going on with NIL? What's going to happen with transfer portal? We may know a lot this week.
It's fascinating, and it is hard to predict. The funny part about it is that the NCAA has told Congress for basically 100 years in a row, please stay out of our business. We don't want you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. This is the exact 180-degree reversal of that. The NCAA is essentially going to Congress and saying, tell us what the rules should be, because if Congress were to give the NCAA some kind of an antitrust exemption, well, then whatever Congress says the new rules are going to be, the NCAA can just, wave its hands and say, that's what Congress decided the future of college sports was going to look like. Don't sue us anymore. I don't think that's going to happen. It's where this is going is complicated, and I believe one probable solution is that at some point, whether they call it a union or not, there's going to have to be negotiations between universities and somebody representing athletes, because the NCAA keeps getting sued and keeps losing. Every time they try to limit something, whether it's transfers or assistant coaches. Back in the day, they lost a lawsuit because they tried to limit the compensation of an extra assistant coach. They got sued there and they lost. They've gotten sued over video games and lost. I mean, for any fans of the Harlem Globetrotters, their opponent, the Washington Generals, is the team that's basically paid to lose. The NCAA has about the same winning percentage in lawsuits that the Washington Generals have against the Harlem Globetrotters. And the NCAA knows that it's in a position of weakness, and that's why they're begging Congress to create this new world for amateur athletics. It is going to be really hard to get Congress to agree on one system. It's going to be really hard to get all these large schools and conferences to agree on a single system. People can forget one of the reasons we didn't get the 12-team playoff a couple years earlier when we could have, it was because the people at the table couldn't decide how to divide the money. And man, you got for this new world of college athletics, you're going to have TV executives at the table. You're going to have the begging for Congress to intervene. But at some point, I believe there's going to have to be a miniature version of what we have in professional sports. And the bottom line in pro sports that people forget sometimes is an NBA draft or an NFL draft would be absolutely illegal against all sorts of laws unless those leagues negotiated with those players' associations. And both sides are represented by attorneys, and the Players Association said, okay, we'll accept a draft, but we want these other, we want these mega $1 million contracts for our players and slotted draft picks and all that stuff. At some point, that kind of negotiation, collective bargaining, they call it, is going to be a part of college sports. And that could evolve either with the current version of the NCAA, or it could evolve with that example that you're mentioning where, 60 schools or some number break away from everybody else and just do it their own way.
Make sure to find him on X at David Glenn Show. Of course, check out his show, davidglennshow.com. David, I appreciate your time. Next time, we'll get you on pretty soon. We'll talk some NCAA basketball as the league up there looks like it's really in a good position this year. I appreciate your time and insight as always, sir.
Thank you, Jake. Always good to be with you.